The woman who said she needed no one stopped at my ranch for one night, then changed everything. The storm did not bring Margaret Hale to Cedar Ridge Ranch. Her pride did. By the time Ethan Walker saw the wagon near the creek crossing, the sky over Dry Creek had turned the color of cold iron. Rain fell in slanted sheets, striking the earth hard enough to raise little bursts of mud. The old road was nearly gone under brown water, and a single gray horse stood trembling in the traces, its ears pinned back against the thunder. Ethan had been riding home with a sack of oats tied behind his saddle when he spotted her. At first, he thought the wagon was empty. Then he saw a woman standing knee-deep in mud beside the front wheel, both hands braced against the spokes, trying to lift what no one person could lift. She was not crying. She was not calling for help. She was not even looking toward the ranch house, though its lamps glowed faintly across the field. That was what made Ethan rein in. Most folks in trouble searched for another face. This woman acted like the whole world had already refused her, and she had accepted it as fact. He rode closer, slow enough not to startle the horse. "Ma'am," he called through the rain, "that creek's rising." She did not turn at once. She pushed once more against the wheel, her boots sliding in the mud. Only then did she look at him. She was not young, but she was not old either. Maybe 40, with dark hair pinned under a travel-worn hat, and a face that had learned how to hide pain before it reached the eyes. Rain ran down her cheek like tears she had no intention of shedding. "I can see that," she said. Ethan almost smiled, but the creek behind her gave a low, hungry rush. "You'll lose the wagon if you stay there." "I'll lose it faster if I stand talking." Her voice was calm, but her hands were shaking. Ethan swung down from his saddle. "Name is Ethan Walker. This is my road." "Then your road needs work." This time he did smile just a little. "Yes, ma'am, it does." She turned away as if the conversation was finished and reached for the reins. The gray horse tossed its head, frightened by another crack of thunder. Ethan stepped forward. "Let me help." "I did not ask." "No, you did not." That made her pause. In the back of the wagon, under a soaked canvas, Ethan noticed trunks, a rolled quilt, 2 chairs, a small iron stove, and one wooden box wrapped in oilcloth. It sat apart from everything else, tied with a leather strap. The woman's eyes moved to it the moment his did. "Do not touch that," she said sharply. Ethan lifted both hands, wasn't planning to. For the first time, something like embarrassment passed across her face. It vanished quickly. Together, without another word, they worked the wheel free. Ethan put his shoulder to the wagon frame while she guided the horse. Mud sucked at his boots. Rain ran under his collar. The wagon groaned, shifted, then lurched up onto firmer ground. The woman stumbled when it moved. Ethan caught her elbow before she fell. She pulled away like his kindness burned. "I'm steady," she said. "I believe you." But she was not steady, not entirely. Her face had gone pale and her breath came short. Behind them, the creek swallowed the place where the wheel had been stuck. Ethan looked toward the ranch. "You can't make town tonight. Dry Creek's still 6 miles, and that road will be black as a cellar by sundown." "I've traveled worse." "I don't doubt it." "Then don't trouble yourself." He looked at the tired horse, the washed-out road, and the woman standing alone in the rain with all her life packed behind her. "It would trouble me more to let you go." She stared at him for a long moment. Thunder rolled over the hills. The gray horse shivered again. At last she said, "One night." "One night," Ethan agreed. "And I sleep near my wagon." "You'll sleep in the house. Wagon can stand by the barn." Her eyes hardened. Ethan softened his voice. "There's a lock on the guest room door. You may use it." That reached her, not much but enough. What kind of rancher keeps a guest room ready? One who had a mother who believed strangers were just neighbors arriving late. The woman looked away. For a moment, rain and wind filled the silence between them. "My name is Margaret Hale," she said finally. Ethan nodded. "Mrs. Hale." "Miss Hale." He noticed the correction. He also noticed the way her hand went, almost without thought, to the wooden box in the wagon. "Miss Hale, then." They led the wagon toward Cedar Ridge as the last light faded behind the hills. The ranch house stood low and warm against the storm, with smoke bending from the chimney and a lantern swinging beside the porch. Ethan tied the horse under shelter while Margaret climbed down stiffly, one hand gripping the wooden box now held tight against her chest. She would not let him carry it. Inside, the kitchen smelled of coffee, wood smoke, and fresh bread left cooling under a cloth. Margaret stood just past the doorway, dripping rain onto the floorboards, looking as if she had stepped into a place she had no right to enter. Ethan set another log on the fire. "There's coffee," he said, "and dry towels." "I can pay." "I didn't ask." Her mouth tightened. Men usually do sooner or later. Ethan turned from the fire and looked at her plainly. "Then you've known poor men." She had no answer for that. For the first time since he found her at the creek, Margaret Hale looked tired. Not angry, not sharp, just tired down to the bone. Outside, the storm beat against the windows. Inside, the locked wooden box rested in her lap like a secret with weight. And when Ethan set a cup of coffee beside her, he saw the corner of an old letter slipping from beneath the strap. The name written on it was not Margaret Hale. Ethan did not ask about the name on the letter. He had learned long ago that a person's secrets were like wild horses. Chase them too soon and they ran harder. Stand quiet long enough, and sometimes they came closer on their own. Margaret noticed his eyes drop to the paper. Her hand moved fast, tucking it back beneath the strap of the wooden box. "It is private," she said. "I figured." "You looked." "I saw. That is not the same as prying." She studied him across the glow of the stove. Rain tapped the window glass in hard little bursts. Her wet dress clung at the sleeves, and a thin line of mud marked one cheek. Still, she held herself straight, as if the chair beneath her was a courtroom bench and not a place to rest. Ethan set a towel near her elbow. "Dry yourself before you catch a chill." "I said I can pay." "I heard you the first time." And I don't sell towels by the hour." A corner of her mouth moved before she could stop it. Not a smile, but the ghost of one. It disappeared quickly. He turned away to give her privacy and busied himself at the stove. There was stew left from noon, enough for two if stretched with bread. He ladled it into bowls while she watched every motion, like she was measuring the kind of man he might become if her guard dropped. When he placed the bowl before her, she waited. Ethan sat across from her and bowed his head for a simple grace. He did not make it long. A few words for shelter, rain, food, and safe roads. When he opened his eyes, Margaret was looking down at her bowl. "My father prayed like that," she said quietly. Then she seemed to regret saying it. Ethan broke a piece of bread. Was he a traveling man? "No." Her answer was a closed gate. They ate in near silence. Outside, the creek kept roaring in the dark. The wind moved around the house like a hand searching for a loose board. Margaret ate slowly at first, then with the careful hunger of someone who had been making supplies last. Ethan noticed but said nothing. He simply pushed the bread plate a little closer to her. That small movement did more than words could have done. Her hand stilled above the table. For one breath, her face softened. Then the house creaked, and the softness vanished. "You live here alone?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "No wife?" "No." "Family?" My mother passed when I was 16. My father followed 3 winters after. Fever took him fast. I'm sorry. The words were plain, but they were not empty. Ethan could hear that. He nodded. Ranch kept me busy after that. Busy is useful. It is. Ethan looked at her then. Sometimes. She lowered her eyes to the box in her lap. After supper, he showed her the guest room at the back of the house. It had a narrow bed, a washstand, a quilt folded across the foot, and a small window looking toward the barn. His mother had sewn the curtains years before, pale blue with tiny white flowers. Margaret stopped in the doorway. I can sleep in the kitchen chair. You could, but you won't sleep well. I don't sleep well anyway. The words came out before she guarded them. Ethan pretended not to hear the pain beneath them. Door locks from the inside. She stepped into the room and tested the lock herself. Once, twice. It holds, Ethan said. I'll decide that. Yes, ma'am. He brought her dry clothes from a trunk that had belonged to his mother, a plain wool wrapper and thick socks. Margaret accepted them with stiff thanks. Her fingers brushed the fabric, and something troubled passed through her eyes. These were hers. My mother's. I should not wear them. She would fuss at me if I let you sit cold all night. Margaret looked at him then, really looked, as if trying to see whether kindness could be a trap. At last she took the clothes. Good night, Mr. Walker. Good night, Miss Hale. He went to the kitchen, banked the fire, and sat there longer than he meant to. The house felt different with another soul inside it, not louder, just less hollow. Near midnight, a sound woke him. Not thunder. A cry. Ethan was on his feet before thought caught up with him. He crossed the dark hall and stopped outside the guest room door. Inside, Margaret was breathing hard. No, she whispered, please no. Ethan raised his hand to knock, then lowered it. The cry had not been meant for him. A moment later came another sound, the soft scrape of wood, then a key turning. He stepped back into the shadow of the hallway as the guest room door opened a crack. Margaret came out carrying the wooden box, her hair loose around her shoulders, his mother's wrapper tied tight at her waist. She did not see him. She moved to the kitchen table, lit the lamp with trembling hands, and opened the box. Ethan should have gone back to bed. He knew that. But then she lifted out a small child's shoe, worn at the toe and tied with a faded blue ribbon. Margaret pressed it against her mouth and bent over it as if grief had finally found the place where she could no longer stand. Ethan looked away, ashamed of having seen so much. The floorboard gave a soft groan under his boot. Margaret froze. Her head turned. In the lamplight, her face was pale and wet with tears. For a long second, neither of them spoke. Then she closed the box with both hands and said in a voice colder than the rain outside, "You should have stayed asleep." Ethan stood in the hallway with one hand on the doorframe, and shame sitting heavy in his chest. "I heard you cry out," he said. Margaret's fingers tightened around the wooden box. "That did not give you leave to watch." "No, ma'am, it did not." The answer seemed to take some of the fire out of her, but not the hurt. She stood beside the kitchen table in the lamplight, barefoot in his mother's socks, her hair falling loose in dark waves threaded with gray. The little shoe was gone now, hidden again inside the box, but its memory seemed to remain in the room like smoke. "You should go back to bed," she said. "So should you." "I will not be ordered in a stranger's house." "I wasn't ordering." "Then stop sounding kind." That struck him silent. Margaret looked away at once, as if she had revealed more than she meant to. Rain still moved across the roof, softer now. The storm was wearing itself thin, but the creek outside kept speaking in a restless voice. Ethan took one step back. You're safe here." Her laugh was small and bitter. Men say that when they want a woman to lower her guard. My mother used to say a locked door means nothing if the house is full of bad hearts. Margaret looked at him then. He held her gaze. This house is not full of bad hearts. For a moment, the only sound was the lamp flame ticking behind its glass. Then she carried the box back to the guest room and closed the door. The lock turned. Ethan stood there until the hall went still, then returned to his chair by the stove. He did not sleep much after that. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and cruelly bright. The creek had fallen some, but the crossing was ruined. Mud covered the road in thick brown ropes, and one of Margaret's wagon wheels had cracked from the strain. She was outside before breakfast, dressed in her own clothes again, her hat pinned firm, the wooden box wrapped and tied in the wagon bed. Ethan found her trying to lift the cracked wheel with a short iron bar. "That will take a smith," he said. "I can get one in town." "Not with that wheel." "I can walk 6 miles through mud." "I have walked farther." "I believe that too." She turned on him, tired anger bright in her eyes. "You believe everything. Does that make you wise or foolish?" "Depends on the day." She looked ready to argue, but the gray horse gave a low, weary sound. That ended it. Margaret went to the animal and laid a hand on its damp neck. "I pushed him too hard," she murmured. Ethan heard the guilt in her voice. "He needs rest, so do you." "I do not have time for rest." "Most folks who say that need it worst." She turned away from the horse. "How long to mend the wheel?" "If I ride to Dry Creek for the smith, maybe tomorrow. Maybe the day after if he's busy." Her shoulders stiffened. "No. No. I cannot be here that long." Ethan did not ask why. He could feel the answer was sitting too close to the surface. Instead, he said, "Then I'll take the wheel off and bring it to him myself. You can remain with your belongings." "I can come." "You can, but that horse cannot." Margaret looked at the gray, then at the wagon, then toward the long, ruined road. Pride fought with sense across her face. Sense won, but not kindly. "One day," she said. "One day," Ethan agreed, though both of them knew weather and iron had little respect for promises. He hitched his bay mare after breakfast and rode for Dry Creek with the broken wheel lashed behind him. As he passed the porch, Margaret stood with her arms folded, watching as if she suspected him of riding away with a piece of her life. "I'll bring it back," he said. "You had better." Dry Creek was waking under a blue sky when Ethan arrived. The town was small enough that news moved faster than horses. By the time he reached the blacksmith's shed, 2 men had already asked whose wheel he was hauling. "A traveler's," Ethan said. "What kind of traveler?" asked Mr. Bell, the storekeeper, leaning in his doorway. "The kind with a broken wheel." That answer earned a few laughs and no more truth. The blacksmith, Amos Rusk, was a thick-armed man with a white beard and a good heart buried under permanent irritation. He looked at the cracked rim and spat into the dust. "Won't be ready till tomorrow evening." "Can it be sooner?" "Can winter be polite?" Ethan sighed. "Tomorrow, then." He bought coffee, flour, and a small tin of peaches because his mother had always said unexpected guests deserved something sweet. At the store counter, Mrs. Bell watched him too closely. "Heard there's a woman at your place." "Then you heard too much." "She respectable?" Ethan's hand stilled on the sack of flour. "She was caught in a storm." "That is not what I asked." He looked at her. "It is the answer I am giving." Mrs. Bell's mouth pinched tight. On his way out, a boy of about 12 came running from the telegraph office with a folded notice in hand. He nearly crashed into Ethan. "Sorry, Mr. Walker." Ethan steadied him by the shoulder. "Slow down, Tommy." The boy clutched the paper. "Sheriff wants this posted. Says a man from Cheyenne sent word." Ethan glanced at the notice. He saw only a few words before Tommy ran on. "Woman traveling alone. May use false name. Wooden keepsake box." Ethan stood in the middle of the street as the sounds of town faded around him. The boy pinned the notice outside the sheriff's office. A few people gathered to read it. Ethan did not move closer. He did not need to. A woman traveling alone. A false name. A wooden box. Back at Cedar Ridge, Margaret Hale sat in his kitchen with the locked box at her feet and a cup of coffee gone cold in her hands. Ethan rode home slower than usual, though the mare wanted a quicker pace. Dust clung to his boots when he dismounted. Margaret came out at once, her face guarded. "The wheel?" she asked. "Tomorrow evening." Her jaw tightened. "I told you one day. I told you what I could. Iron told me different." She looked past him toward the road. "Did anyone ask about me?" Ethan lifted the sacks from his saddle. "Yes." "What did you say?" "That you were caught in a storm." "And nothing else?" "Nothing else." Her eyes searched his face, sharp and afraid. Ethan carried the supplies inside and set them on the table. He took off his hat slowly. "There's a notice in town," he said. Margaret went still. The whole house seemed to hold its breath. Ethan kept his voice calm. "It says a woman is traveling alone, says she may be using a false name, says she carries a wooden keepsake box." Margaret's face lost all color. For one moment, she looked not like the proud woman from the creek, but like someone who had been running so long she had forgotten what it felt like to stop. Ethan waited. She reached for the back of the chair, her fingers trembling. Then she whispered, "Did it say who was looking for her?" Ethan did not answer quickly. Margaret watched his face the way a person watches a match near dry hay. One wrong flicker, one careless breath, and everything could burn. "The notice did not name him," Ethan said. "It only said word came from Cheyenne." Her eyes closed. That small movement told him more than any confession could have. "You know who sent it," he said. Margaret opened her eyes again, and the softness was gone. Knowing and speaking are different things. "Yes, ma'am." "Do not yes, ma'am me while looking at me like that." "Like what?" "Like you already decided I need saving." Ethan set his hat on the table. "I have not decided anything except that you are scared." "I am not scared." "The chair says different." She looked down. Her knuckles were white against the wood. Slowly she let go. The room was bright with late afternoon sun, but it felt colder than morning. Dust shone in the beams by the window. Outside, the gray horse shifted in the barn, and somewhere in the yard, a loose hinge tapped in the wind. Margaret stepped back from the table. "I should leave." "On a broken wagon." "I will walk." "With that box." "If I must." "And when the sheriff sees you on the road." Her breath caught, then sharpened. "So you believe the notice?" "I believe someone is hunting for you." "I am not a criminal." "I did not say you were." "People do not need proof once paper is nailed to a wall." Ethan looked toward the window, toward the road that led to Dry Creek. "That much is true." For the first time her anger faltered. She seemed tired of holding it up. "There was a man in Cheyenne," she said. Ethan waited. Margaret's gaze dropped to the locked box. "His name was Silas Pike. He ran a freight office and dressed well enough for church, though I doubt the Lord enjoyed the sight of him. I worked there keeping ledgers." "Was he your husband?" "No." The word came fast, hard. Then softer, "No." She sat at the table as if her knees had given out without permission. Ethan remained standing, giving her room. He wanted what did not belong to him, she said. Money first, then records, then obedience. I would not give him any of the three. And the box. Her hand moved toward it, but she did not touch it. The box belonged to my sister. That was all she gave him. Ethan understood not to press, though every unanswered piece hung between them like storm clouds. Margaret stood again. I need my wheel. You'll have it tomorrow. Tomorrow may be too late. Before Ethan could answer, hoofbeats sounded outside. Not one horse. Two. Margaret turned toward the window with such fear that Ethan's chest tightened. He moved to the door and looked out. It was not the sheriff. It was Mrs. Clara Bell from town in a small buggy, with young Tommy beside her holding a bundle wrapped in cloth. Ethan opened the door before she could knock. Mrs. Bell. Her eyes moved past his shoulder and found Margaret. A polite smile appeared, thin as paper. Mr. Walker, I brought the sewing you ordered last month. Since you were in town today, I thought I might save you another ride. I did not order sewing. Her smile did not change, didn't you? Ethan stepped onto the porch, blocking the doorway just enough. Tommy looked uncomfortable. He held the bundle out. Ma said to come. Mrs. Bell leaned sideways, trying to see inside. Afternoon, miss. Margaret's voice came from behind Ethan, calm as winter glass. Afternoon. A hard storm last night. Yes. Roads are dangerous for women alone. So are towns, depending on who speaks first. Ethan almost turned. Mrs. Bell's smile faded. Well, the woman said, Dry Creek is a respectable place. We like knowing who passes through. Margaret stepped into the doorway then. She had put on her hat. Her face was pale, but her chin was lifted. Then write this down carefully, she said. My name is Margaret Hale. My horse was tired, my wagon wheel broke, and Mr. Walker has behaved with more decency than many who call themselves respectable. Tommy stared at his boots. Mrs. Bell's cheeks colored. I meant no offense. Most people don't, they only carry it. The wind moved the porch lantern, though it was not lit. For a moment, no one spoke. Ethan took the bundle from Tommy. Thank you for coming. Mrs. Bell gathered the reins. Sheriff Crane may ride out later, since there is a notice and all. Margaret's fingers tightened at her side. Ethan kept his voice even. Then I will offer him coffee. Mrs. Bell drove away with Tommy glancing back once, wide-eyed and sorry. When the buggy vanished around the bend, Margaret released a breath she had been holding. You should not have stood in front of me, she said. I was standing in my doorway. You know what I mean. Yes. And I'd do it again. Her face changed then. Not much. Just enough for Ethan to see that she was not used to hearing someone say such things without asking a price. Inside, the kitchen felt smaller than before. Margaret walked to the table and opened the wooden box. This time she did not hide it from him. Inside lay the child's shoe, a folded ribbon, 3 letters tied together, and a small leather ledger wrapped in cloth. She lifted the ledger with both hands. My sister died in Cheyenne, she said. Her little boy died before her. Fever took him. Grief took what was left of her. Ethan's throat tightened. Margaret stared at the ledger. Before she passed, she gave me this. It holds names, payments, false debts. Silas Pike used poor widows and freight workers and ranch families who could not read a contract well enough to fight back. He stole from them lawfully, which is the cruelest kind of stealing. And now he wants it back. Yes. Why not give it to the sheriff? Because Pike has friends with badges. Ethan thought of the notice nailed in town. Then he understood. You are not running from the law, he said. Margaret looked up. eyes wet but steady. "No, Mr. Walker, I was running with the truth." A sound broke the quiet. Hoofbeats again. This time there was only one horse, moving with purpose down the wet road. Ethan went to the window. A rider in a dark coat approached the ranch, silver badge catching the last light. Margaret closed the box. And for the first time since he had met her, she whispered his name. "Ethan." Ethan heard the fear in his name. It was quiet, but it changed everything. Until that moment, Margaret had fought him, doubted him, corrected him, and kept one hand on the door of herself. But when she said his name, she did not sound like a woman asking for rescue. She sounded like a woman, deciding whether trust was worth the danger. Ethan turned from the window, put the box away. Margaret did not move. "Margaret," he said, softer now, "not because I doubt you, because if that badge belongs to a good man, he can hear the truth in order. If it belongs to a bad one, he does not get to see your proof before we know." That reached her. She wrapped the ledger again, placed it beneath the child's shoe, and closed the box. Her hands were still trembling, but she worked fast. Ethan took the box and set it behind the loose hearthstone near the stove, a place only he and his father had ever used. The knock came hard. Ethan opened the door. Sheriff Jonah Crane stood on the porch, hat low, coat damp from the road. He was a lean man near 50, with tired eyes and a mustache gone gray at the edges. His badge was clean. His boots were not. "Ethan," he said. "Sheriff." Crane looked past him. "Evening, ma'am." Margaret stood by the table, straight-backed and pale. "Sheriff." "Mrs. Bell says you're stranded here." "She says many things," Ethan replied. Crane's eyes moved to him. "I am asking the lady." Margaret lifted her chin. "My wagon wheel broke after last night's storm. Mr. Walker brought it to town for repair." "That your true name, Margaret Hale?" "It is the name I use." "That was not my question." Ethan stepped forward, careful. Crane's jaw tightened. "Do not make this harder than it needs to be." Margaret gave a small, bitter laugh. Men with power always say that before they make something harder. The sheriff looked at her for a long moment. Then he removed his hat. "I have a notice from Cheyenne," he said. "Says a woman traveling alone may be carrying stolen papers." "They are not stolen." "So there are papers." Ethan's stomach tightened. Margaret's face went still. She had given away too much, but she did not lower her eyes. Crane sighed. "Miss Hale, I do not know Selah's Pike well, but I know the kind of men who send notices without putting their own name where honest folks can see it. That makes me careful." Margaret studied him. "Careful for whom?" "For the town, for the law, and for the truth. If we can find it before gossip chews it to pieces." Ethan watched her consider him. Crane continued, "I am not here to drag you anywhere tonight, but I do need answers." "You will have none without Reverend Cole present," Margaret said. Ethan looked at her, surprised. She glanced at him. "A churchman may not stop a crooked lawman, but he makes it harder for one to lie later." Sheriff Crane almost smiled. "Fair enough, tomorrow morning, church office. Bring what you have." Margaret said nothing. Crane put his hat back on. "And Miss Hale?" "Yes." "If you run before morning, it will make you look guilty." Her eyes hardened. "I have looked guilty to people before. It did not make them right." The sheriff nodded once, then left. When the hoofbeats faded, Margaret sat down as if all the strength had gone from her legs. Ethan retrieved the box and placed it gently on the table. "You did well," he said. "I spoke too soon." "You spoke true." "That is not always safe." "No," Ethan said, "but it is still true." She looked at him then, and something in her face nearly broke. I buried my sister with no stone, she whispered. Silas Pike owned the cemetery debt too. Can you imagine that, charging grief interest? Ethan said nothing. He took her house after her son died. Then he took the last money she had. She kept records because she wanted someone to know. She thought if she wrote it all down, justice would come. Margaret opened the box and touched the small shoe. But justice does not come just because a woman suffers. Ethan pulled out the chair across from her. Sometimes it comes because she survives long enough to bring it. Her eyes filled, but she would not let the tears fall. Outside, evening settled blue over Cedar Ridge. The barn horse stamped once. A lantern trembled in the window from the wind slipping under the sill. Margaret closed the box. If this moment touched your heart, stay with the story because the truth has only begun to rise. Then she looked embarrassed by her own softness and turned toward the fire. Ethan pretended not to notice. That night, Margaret did not lock the guest room door. Ethan noticed that too. Morning came cold and clear. They rode to Dry Creek together in Ethan's buckboard, the box between them beneath a folded quilt. Margaret wore her hat low, but she did not hide her face. The town watched them arrive. Mrs. Bell stood outside the store. Amos Rusk paused at his forge. A group of children near the schoolyard stared openly. Word had moved before them, as word always did. Margaret stepped down without accepting Ethan's hand. Then, after one breath, she turned back and took it anyway. It was a small thing. In a town full of watching eyes, it felt like a shout. Inside the church office, Sheriff Crane waited with Reverend Samuel Cole, a broad, gentle man with silver hair and kind hands. Margaret placed the ledger on the desk. "This belonged to my sister, Ruth Bennett," she said. "Before that, the numbers belonged to every poor soul Silas Pike cheated." Crane opened the ledger. His expression changed by the second page. Reverend Cole leaned closer. "Lord have mercy." Ethan stood near the door, listening as Margaret named the dead, the ruined, the widowed, and the cheated. Her voice shook only once when she spoke her sister's name. Then a wagon stopped outside. Heavy boots crossed the church steps. Sheriff Crane looked up. The office door opened, and a well-dressed man with cold eyes smiled at Margaret as if greeting an old friend. "Mary Bennett," he said softly, "you have led me on a long chase." The name struck Margaret harder than any hand could have. Mary Bennett. It was not spoken loud, but the room heard it. Sheriff Crane heard it. Reverend Cole heard it. Ethan heard it and turned toward her with the question already in his eyes. Margaret did not look at him. She kept her gaze on the man in the doorway. Silas Pike was dressed too fine for Dry Creek. His black coat had no dust on it. His boots shone. A gold watch chain crossed his vest, and his smile carried the smooth patience of a banker counting another man's last dollar. "Do not call me that," she said. "But it is your name." "It was my sister's name." Pike's smile widened. Now, we both know Ruth was the sister, poor thing, dead and gone, and you, Mary, vanished with property from my office." Margaret's face tightened, but she still did not move. Ethan stepped away from the wall. "Her name is Margaret Hale." Pike's eyes slid toward him. "And you are?" "The man whose door she came to." "How noble!" Ethan said nothing, but his hands curled at his sides. Sheriff Crane stood. "Mr. Pike, this is my town. You will speak plainly or not at all." Pike lifted both hands in false respect. "Of course, Sheriff. I am only relieved to find her safe. Miss Bennett has been troubled since her nephew died. Grief can confuse a woman." Margaret flinched. Ethan saw it and understood. Pike did not need to raise his voice. He used pain like a knife wrapped in silk. Reverend Cole placed one hand on the ledger. "This book names several families. Payments, debts, property transfers." Private business records, Pike said. Stolen private business records. They were written by Ruth Bennett, Margaret said. Under my employment. She wrote them because you cheated people who trusted you. Pike sighed as if disappointed in a child. There, you see, Sheriff, wild claims, emotion, no proof that she understands what she took. Margaret stepped forward. I understand every page. Then you understand those papers belong to me. No, she said, they belong to the people you ruined. For the first time, Pike's smile slipped. Only a little. But Ethan saw it. Sheriff Crane closed the ledger. Mr. Pike, I'll be keeping this for review. Pike's eyes sharpened. You have no right. I have a badge and a church witness. That will do for today. This woman is wanted in Cheyenne. By whom? Pike paused. Crane leaned in. By whom exactly? Pike's jaw worked once. A complaint was made. By you. On behalf of my office. For theft. Yes. Crane tapped the ledger. Then you may file proper papers and return with them. Until then, Miss Hale remains free. Pike looked at Margaret again. The warmth in his smile was gone now. You always did hide behind men when trouble came. Margaret's face went white. Ethan moved before he thought, but Margaret lifted one hand. Not to Pike. To Ethan. A silent plea. Do not. So Ethan stopped. Margaret took one slow breath. No, Silas, I hid from men like you. There is a difference. The church office went still. Pike's eyes darkened. Then his smile returned, smaller and crueler. This is not over. Sheriff Crane picked up his hat. In Dry Creek, it is over for today. Pike left without another word. Only when his boots faded down the steps did Margaret sit. Her hand shook against the edge of the desk. Ethan wanted to ask about the name, about Mary Bennett, about why she had not told him. But not there. Not with the sheriff holding her sister's ledger, and the whole town waiting outside for something to feed on. Reverend Cole spoke gently. Miss Hale, are you in danger from him? Margaret stared at the floor. Everyone is in danger from men who lose control of a secret. Sheriff Crane nodded. I'll send a wire to Cheyenne, quietly. There are honest men there, even if Pike forgot that. And until then, Ethan asked. Crane looked from him to Margaret. Until then, she should not be alone. Margaret's chin lifted. I have been alone for years. Then you have had enough practice, the sheriff said. Try something safer. No one smiled, but the words landed kindly. By late afternoon, the town had divided itself into whispers. Some believed Pike because his coat looked expensive. Some believed Margaret because pain sat too honestly in her eyes. Most did what people often do when truth is hard. They waited to see which side would cost less. Ethan drove Margaret back to Cedar Ridge, with the repaired wheel rattling in the wagon bed. For a long while neither spoke. The sky had cleared into a pale gold evening. Water shone in the ruts. Meadow grass bent beneath the wind. Margaret sat beside him with her hands folded tight, looking straight ahead. At last Ethan said, Mary. She closed her eyes. I should have told you, she whispered. You don't owe me every wound. I owed you the truth after you stood beside me. He kept his eyes on the road. Then tell it now. Margaret looked toward the hills, where the sun was lowering behind a line of dark pines. Mary Bennett was my birth name, she said. Ruth was my younger sister. When she married, she became Ruth Hale. After she died, I took her married name and my middle name. Margaret Hale sounded like a woman no one was looking for. Ethan let the words settle. Pike knows the old name, she continued. He knows how to make me look unstable, a grieving aunt, a bitter clerk, a woman past her place. He does not need everyone to believe him, only enough. Ethan's grip tightened on the reins. I believed you before I knew your name. She turned to him then. The wind touched a loose strand of hair against her cheek. For once, she did not fix it. Why? She asked. Ethan thought of the creek, the storm, the wooden box, the little shoe, and the way she had taken his hand outside the church. Because liars usually want to be admired, he said. You only wanted to be left in peace. Her eyes softened, and the silence between them changed. Not healed, but warmer. When Cedar Ridge came into view, Margaret looked at the ranch house differently than she had before. Less like shelter borrowed for a night, more like a place she was afraid to want. Ethan helped repair the wagon before supper. Margaret stood beside him, holding nails, handing tools, learning the work without being asked. Once, their fingers touched over a hammer. Neither pulled away quickly. The moment was small, but it filled the air. That evening, after coffee, Margaret stood at the guest room door with the wooden box in her arms. I will lock the door tonight, she said. Ethan nodded, all right. She looked down, not because of you. I know. Her hand rested on the latch. Then she added, because if I do not, I may forget I am meant to leave. Ethan said nothing. He could have told her he wanted her to stay. He could have told her the house felt less empty when she crossed a room. He could have said her name, the true one or the chosen one, and asked which she wanted him to keep. But he understood enough now to wait. Margaret closed the door. The lock turned. Outside, beyond the barn, a rider watched the ranch from the ridge until the last lamp went dark. The rider on the ridge did not come closer that night. He only watched. The next morning, Ethan found the tracks before the sun had fully cleared the hills. One horse had stood near the old cedar above the south pasture, not long enough to graze, but long enough to leave deep half-moons in the soft ground. The rider had turned back toward the main road before dawn. Ethan crouched beside the prince, dust on one knee, jaw tight. Margaret stood behind him with her shawl wrapped close. Pike. Maybe. You say maybe when you mean yes. I say maybe when I cannot prove yes. She looked toward the ridge. The wind lifted the edge of her shawl, and for a moment she seemed smaller than her pride allowed. I should leave before this trouble roots itself in your land. Ethan rose. Trouble already came here. It does not get to decide who belongs. Ethan. The way she said his name now was different, softer but burdened. He wanted to reach for her hand. Instead, he brushed dirt from his palm and looked toward the barn. Sheriff Crane needs to know. They rode into Dry Creek by mid-morning. Margaret sat beside Ethan in the buckboard, the wooden box at her feet again. She had stopped hiding it under quilts. That alone felt like a kind of courage. The town was busier than usual. Folks stood outside the store and blacksmith shop, speaking low. Children paused their games when the wagon passed. Mrs. Bell looked out from behind her window curtain, then vanished. At the sheriff's office, Jonah Crane had news waiting. I sent the wire, he said. Got one back before breakfast. Margaret's fingers tightened around the chair arm. Crane unfolded the paper. Silas Pike is known in Cheyenne, not loved. There are complaints but no convictions. The marshal there says if we have records, he wants copies sent under seal. Margaret closed her eyes for one breath. So someone will listen. Someone already is. Ethan looked at the sheriff and Pike. Crane's face darkened, gone from the hotel before dawn. Margaret stood, then he is nearby. Likely. Reverend Cole entered just then, hat in hand, breath quick from walking fast. Jonah, there is a problem at the church. They all turned. The Reverend looked at Margaret. The ledger pages, the copies I began making last night. Someone broke the office window. Margaret went very still. The ledger. Safe, the Reverend said quickly. Sheriff Crane had it locked here, but my copied pages are gone. Ethan felt anger rise hot in his chest. Crane took his rifle from the wall, though he kept it pointed down. Nobody moves alone today. Margaret lifted her chin. I am going to the church. No, Ethan and Crane said together. She looked at both of them. Those stolen pages carry names of people Pike hurt. If he has them, he knows who may speak against him. Crane's expression changed. Margaret was right. By noon, Dry Creek had become a town holding its breath. Men checked barn doors. Women pulled children closer. Those who had whispered against Margaret now avoided her eyes, ashamed but not ready to say so. At the church office, broken glass glittered on the floorboards. Reverend Cole stood by the desk, troubled and pale. Margaret knelt near the window. A small strip of black cloth clung to a splinter of wood. Ethan picked it free. Fine coat cloth. Pike, she said. But then Tommy Bell appeared in the doorway, face white. It were Mr. Pike, the boy said. Everyone turned. Tommy swallowed hard. I saw who broke in. His mother came running up the church steps. Tommy Bell, hush your mouth. The boy looked at Margaret, then at Ethan, then at the sheriff. His small hands curled at his sides. It was Mr. Larkin from the freight shed, he whispered. He met that fancy man last night behind the store. Mrs. Bell covered her mouth. Sheriff Crane stepped forward. You sure, son? Tommy nodded. Mr. Pike gave him money. I heard him say if the woman talks, good men will lose everything. Margaret looked toward the door, where sunlight fell across the broken glass. There, she said quietly. That is how men like Pike live so long. They make others afraid of the truth. Sheriff Crane left at once to find Larkin. Ethan stayed with Margaret as the church emptied. Mrs. Bell lingered near the pews, twisting a handkerchief in her hands. Miss Hale, she said. Margaret looked at her. Mrs. Bell's voice shook. I judged you too quickly. Margaret's face remained guarded. The older woman glanced at Tommy. My boy did better than I did. For a moment, Margaret said nothing. Then she stepped closer and placed a gentle hand on Tommy's shoulder. Your boy told the truth when grown folks were afraid. That is no small thing. Tommy stood a little taller. If you believe one honest voice can change a whole town, hold that thought close. Dry Creek is about to learn what courage costs. By evening, Larkin had vanished. Sheriff Crane found his freight shed empty, his horse gone, and the stolen copies missing with him. Worse, Crane found an unsigned note pinned to the shed door. Ethan read it aloud in the sheriff's office. Bring the ledger to the old stage station by midnight, or every name in that book will be ruined before Monday. Margaret's face did not change, but Ethan saw her hand reach for the child's shoe inside the open box. Reverend Cole shook his head. It is bait. Yes, Sheriff Crane said, and still we must answer it. Margaret stood slowly. No, I must answer it. Ethan turned to her. You are not riding there alone. I have spent years carrying this truth. I will not let Pike use those families to save himself. He wants the ledger. And if he does not get it, he will harm innocent people with lies. Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice. Margaret, listen to me. Bravery is not the same as walking into a trap. Her eyes met his, bright with fear and resolve. No, she said, but sometimes it feels exactly the same. Midnight came with no moon. The old stage station sat 3 miles beyond town, leaning against the prairie like a tired animal. Ethan rode beside Sheriff Crane through the dark, with Margaret between them in the buckboard. The ledger in her lap was not the real one. Crane had hidden the true ledger in the church bell tower and filled this cover with blank pages. Still, Margaret held it like it weighed as much as a life. When they reached the station, a lantern burned inside. A voice called from the dark doorway. "Come in alone, Mary." Margaret's breath trembled. Ethan leaned close. "You do not have to prove anything to him." She looked at the lantern, then at Ethan. "I know," she whispered. "I have to prove it to myself." And before he could stop her, Margaret Hale stepped down from the wagon and walked toward the light. Margaret crossed the broken threshold of the old stage station, with the false ledger pressed against her chest. The room smelled of dust, old rain, and wood that had spent too many winters giving up. A lantern sat on a crate near the center of the floor. Its light made the shadows tall and strange. In the corner, a loose shutter knocked softly against the wall with every breath of wind. Silas Pike stood beside the cold fireplace. He had removed his fine hat. Without it, he looked less like a gentleman and more like what he truly was, a man afraid of losing the costume that fooled the world. "You came," he said. Margaret stopped near the lantern. "You called." "I expected Sheriff Crane." "He is outside." Pike smiled, and the rancher. "Outside too." How loyal. Men become fools quickly when a woman lets them feel useful. Margaret's fingers tightened on the ledger. "Do not speak of him." That pleased Pike. "So that is the wound now." "No, that is the line." For a moment the smile left him. Behind the station, Ethan waited in the dark with Sheriff Crane. Every part of him wanted to storm the room, but Crane held up one hand. They needed Pike to speak. They needed his own words to do what the stolen pages could not. Inside, Margaret lifted her chin. "Where are the copies?" "Safe." "You mean hidden." "My name is Margaret." "You can dress a lie in any name you like." She took one slow breath. "I changed my name because yours had made my old one unsafe." His eyes hardened. "You always were dramatic." "No," she said. "I was obedient, then I was grieving, then I was afraid, now I am tired." Pike glanced toward the door. "Tired women make mistakes. So do desperate men." The lantern flickered. Wind slipped through the cracked walls and stirred the dust around their feet. Pike held out his hand, the ledger. Margaret did not move. "Admit what you did to Ruth." His face went still. "Say her name," Margaret said. "She was weak." The words came soft, but they filled the room with cruelty. Outside, Ethan's jaw clenched. Margaret's eyes shone. She was kind. "She signed what she signed." "You lied to her." "I gave her terms." "You took her home after her child died." "She owed money." "She owed grief, that was all." Pike stepped close enough that the lantern showed the anger under his skin. "Your sister was a foolish widow with no head for numbers. I did what any man of business would do." Margaret looked at him with tears in her eyes, but her voice stayed steady. "Thank you." Pike frowned. "For what?" "For saying it where honest men can hear." The back door burst open. Sheriff Crane stepped inside with his pistol lowered but ready. Ethan came through behind him, eyes fixed on Margaret. Pike turned sharply. "This is a trick." Crane's voice was cold. "No, this is testimony." Pike lunged for the ledger in Margaret's hands. Ethan reached her first, pulling her back as Crane seized Pike by the arm. The struggle lasted only seconds. No shot was fired. No blood touched the floor. Only the lantern shook, throwing wild light across the walls until Ethan caught it before it fell. Pike stood breathing hard, his fine coat twisted in Crane's grip. "You have nothing," Pike said. Margaret opened the ledger and turned it toward him. "Blank pages." His face changed. Ethan saw the exact moment Pike understood. Margaret had not brought the truth into danger. She had brought Pike's pride. Crane tied Pike's wrists with a leather strap. "Silas Pike, you are coming with me." For what charge? For now, attempted theft, threats, and interfering with evidence. Once Cheyenne reads that ledger, I expect they will add plenty. Pike looked at Margaret, and for the first time she saw fear in him. Not sorrow. Not shame. Only fear. It was enough. The stolen copies were found under a loose board in the station floor before dawn. Larkin's name was there too, written on a payment slip Pike had been careless enough to keep. Sheriff Crane said careless men often thought themselves clever right up to the end. When they returned to Dry Creek, the town was waiting. No one cheered. This was not that kind of victory. It was quieter, heavier. Folks stood in shawls and coats under the gray morning sky while Crane led Pike to the jail. Mrs. Bell held Tommy close. Reverend Cole rang the church bell once. Margaret stood beside Ethan near the buckboard, exhausted and pale. The wooden box sat at her feet. For the first time it was not locked. Before the next truth comes out, tell me in your heart what you would have done. Would you have trusted Ethan, or would fear have kept you on the road? Ethan looked at Margaret. You should rest. She gave a faint, tired smile. You say that often. You ignore it often. I have practice. He almost smiled back, but her face changed. Her gaze had moved past him. At the far end of the street, a woman in a dark traveling cloak stepped down from the morning stage. She held a carpetbag in one hand and a folded paper in the other. Sheriff Crane saw her and stopped. The woman looked straight at Margaret. Mary Bennett, she called. Margaret stiffened. Ethan felt the air shift. The woman came closer, her eyes wet and shining. I came from Cheyenne. I knew your sister. Margaret's hand found the edge of the wagon. The woman held out the folded paper. Ruth left one more letter, she said, and she asked that it only be given to you when Silas Pike could no longer take it. Margaret did not take the letter at first. She stared at it as if paper could wound as deeply as any blade. The town stood still around her. The morning stage creaked behind the woman from Cheyenne. A horse shook its harness. Somewhere down the street, a shop bell moved in the wind, soft and lonely. Ethan stayed close, but he did not touch her. The woman lowered her voice. My name is Abigail Turner. I washed linens at the boarding house where Ruth stayed her last month. She was kind to me when few others were. Margaret's lips parted, but no words came. Abigail looked at the small wooden box near Margaret's feet. She kept that box under her bed. Every night she would check the latch before sleeping, said it held the last proof that her boy had been real. Margaret's face folded for one painful second. Then she reached for the letter. Her hand shook so badly that Ethan feared she might drop it, but she held on. Why did you wait? Margaret asked. Abigail looked toward the jail, where Silas Pike had disappeared behind iron bars. Because Ruth made me promise. She said if Pike still had power, the letter would only give him another way to hurt you. Margaret swallowed. Did she suffer? Abigail's eyes filled. She missed her child, but she spoke of you with love. That answer was gentle, but it struck hard. Margaret turned away from the watching town and walked toward the church steps. Ethan followed at a distance. Reverend Cole opened the church door without a word, and she went inside carrying the letter against her heart. The church was quiet except for the faint groan of old boards. Morning light poured through plain windows, landing across the pews in pale bars. Margaret sat in the front row, where dust floated like tiny sparks in the sun. Ethan remained near the aisle. You can read it alone, he said. She looked down at the folded paper. I have been alone with my grief long enough. So he sat beside her. For a long moment she only held the letter, then she opened it. The writing was weak, but it was Ruth's. Margaret knew it at once. She pressed one hand to her mouth, then forced herself to read. Her eyes moved slowly over the page. The more she read, the more her face changed. Pain came first, then surprise, then something Ethan had never seen in her before. Relief. When she finished, the letter rested in her lap. She knew, Margaret whispered. Ethan waited. She knew I blamed myself for leaving Cheyenne before her boy took sick. I thought if I had stayed, I could have helped. I thought maybe she died believing I had abandoned her. Her voice broke. Ethan spoke softly, and she did not. Margaret shook her head, tears finally falling freely. She wrote that I was the strongest person she knew. She said I had given her courage all her life. She asked me to stop mistaking survival for selfishness. The words emptied the strength from her. Ethan reached across the space between them, slow enough for her to refuse. She did not. Her hand settled into his. It was cold, fragile, real. Margaret looked at their joined hands like she had never seen such a thing before. She asked me to live, she said, not just carry the truth, live. Outside, the church bell rope moved slightly in the draft. No bell rang. No crowd entered. The world gave her the mercy of a quiet moment. Ethan's thumb moved once across her knuckles. Then maybe you should listen to your sister, he said. A faint laugh came through her tears. She was always bossy. I would have liked her. She would have liked you. Margaret looked at him then, and the words seemed to surprise her as much as him. She would have trusted you sooner than I did. I was not in a hurry. No, she said softly, that is what frightened me. He did not understand. Margaret folded the letter carefully. Men who wanted something from me were always impatient. They pushed, they praised, they promised. They made kindness feel like a bill waiting to be collected. She looked at him with wet eyes. You waited. I did not know what to do with that. Ethan's throat tightened. You do not owe me for waiting. I know. Her fingers held his a little tighter. That is what makes it matter. By afternoon, Sheriff Crane had Pike's statement, the ledger, the stolen copies, and 3 sworn witnesses ready to send to Cheyenne. Larkin was found hiding in a hayloft east of town before supper. He confessed to taking Pike's money, then wept into his hands when he realized Pike had meant to ruin him too. Dry Creek changed in small ways that day. Mrs. Bell brought Margaret a covered dish and no questions. Amos Rusk fixed the wagon wheel without charging. Tommy Bell left a bunch of prairie flowers on the buckboard seat, tied with twine and a crooked note that read, "For being brave." Margaret read it twice. Then she tucked the note inside the wooden box beside the child's shoe. The next morning, her wagon was ready. That was the trouble with repaired things. They gave a person the choice to leave. Ethan found her in the barn before sunrise. She was brushing the gray horse, moving slowly, as if each stroke bought her another moment before deciding. You leaving today? He asked. She did not turn. I planned to. Plans can change. Yes. The horse shifted under her hand. Dust rose in the soft gold light. Ethan leaned against the stall post, quiet. Margaret finally faced him. I have spent 12 years not belonging anywhere, she said. After a while, a person starts calling it freedom because the other word hurts too much. What word? Loneliness. Ethan let the word sit between them. She looked toward the open barn doors, where Cedar Ridge stretched beneath the waking sky. I do not know how to stay. He stepped closer, but not too close. Then stay one morning. Her eyes searched his face. And after that? Stay one supper. A trembling smile touched her mouth. And after that? One honest day at a time. Margaret looked down. You make it sound simple. No, Ethan said. I make it sound possible. For a long while, she said nothing. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out Ruth's letter. She told me to live, Margaret whispered. She was right. Margaret looked at the wagon, then at the road, then back at Ethan. "I'm afraid," she said. "I know. I may still leave. I know that too. And if I stay, I will not become soft and sweet and easy." Ethan smiled then, warm and sure. "I was hoping you would not." This time, Margaret smiled back. It was small, but it reached her eyes. Outside, the first sun touched the roof of Cedar Ridge. Inside the barn, a woman who had carried grief like a locked box finally loosened her grip. Then a rider came hard down the road from town, waving his hat. It was Sheriff Crane. He reined in near the barn, breathless. "Ethan, Miss Hale." His face was grave, but there was light in his eyes. "The wire came from Cheyenne." Margaret went still. Crane held up the folded message. "It changes everything." Margaret could not reach for the telegram. Her hand rose halfway, then stopped, as if the air itself had become too heavy. Sheriff Crane stepped down from his horse and handed the paper to Ethan instead. "Read it." Ethan unfolded it carefully. The morning wind moved through the barn door, carrying the smell of wet earth and horse sweat. Margaret stood so still beside the gray horse that even the animal seemed to understand the moment mattered. Ethan read the telegram once. Then again. His face changed. Margaret's voice came small. "Say it." Ethan looked at her. Cheyenne found 3 more ledgers in Pike's office, hidden behind a false wall. Her breath caught. Crane nodded. Names, deeds, forged notes, payments to men who helped him, enough to bury his business for good. Margaret closed her eyes. Ethan kept reading. "The marshal says Ruth Bennett's records are confirmed. Her claims were true." The words struck Margaret like sunlight after years underground. True. Not imagined, not bitter, not grief-twisted, true. She turned away, one hand pressed to the horse's neck. Her shoulders shook once, but she did not fall apart. She only bowed her head and whispered, "Ruth, they heard you." Sheriff Crane removed his hat. Ethan folded the telegram and waited. There was one more line. Margaret looked back. What else? Ethan's eyes softened. "The marshal asks that Mary Bennett, also known as Margaret Hale, remain in Dry Creek as a protected witness until trial." Crane cleared his throat. "That means you have legal reason to stay." Margaret looked at the ranch house beyond the barn doors. The porch lantern hung still in the pale morning. The windows caught the first light. The place no longer looked borrowed. It looked possible. "A legal reason," she said quietly. Ethan stepped closer. "Only if you want one." For a long moment she said nothing. Then she reached into the wooden box, took out the little shoe, and held it in both hands. She did not hide it now. She carried it into the house, placed it on the mantel beside Ethan's mother's old blue curtains, and stood looking at it through tears. "This was Thomas's," she said. "Ruth's boy. He had a laugh like bells." Ethan stood beside her. Then he should be remembered in a house with sound in it. Margaret turned to him. The last wall in her face came down slowly. Not all at once. Not like surrender. Like a tired door finally opening because the person outside had never once tried to force it. "I do not know how to begin again," she whispered. Ethan took her hand. "Then do not begin again, begin from here." That afternoon, Dry Creek gathered at the church. Reverend Cole read Ruth's name aloud, then the names of every family the ledgers had cleared. No one cheered. Some cried. Some lowered their heads in shame for believing a fine coat over a wounded woman. Mrs. Bell stood before Margaret and said, "I was wrong." Margaret looked at her a long while, then she nodded. "Then be right next time." It was not soft, but it was mercy. Weeks passed. Pike was taken to Cheyenne in irons and the town watched without joy. Larkin gave testimony. Families reclaimed deeds. Debts were struck down. Ruth Bennett finally received a proper stone in the cemetery, paid for by the people her courage had helped save. At the bottom, Margaret had carved one line. She kept the truth until the world was ready to hear it. Spring came gentle over Cedar Ridge. Margaret did stay. First one morning, then one supper, then one honest day at a time. She helped Ethan mend the south fence. She planted herbs by the kitchen door. She laughed once while trying to teach him proper penmanship, and Ethan remembered the sound all evening like a song he had been waiting years to hear. On the first Sunday of June, he found her on the porch holding Ruth's letter. "Still afraid?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Leaving?" She looked across the fields, where the road curved past the creek that had brought her there. Then she looked at him. "No." He smiled. She took his hand, not quickly and not shyly, but with the steady courage of a woman choosing her own life at last. If this story stayed with you, like the road to Cedar Ridge stayed with Margaret, leave a like and subscribe for more frontier stories where pain meets kindness, and truth finally finds its way home. As the sun lowered over Wyoming, the porch lantern moved softly in the wind. Inside the house, a child's little shoe rested beside an old letter and a fresh bunch of prairie flowers. And Margaret Hale, who once said she needed no one, stood beside Ethan Walker and learned that needing someone was not weakness. Sometimes it was the first brave step toward home.